Questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister explain why his government has taken a decision to unilaterally determine where Israel's borders lie? Does the Prime Minister think it was appropriate for him to hang one of Australia's closest Middle East security partners out to dry as part of a backroom deal to avoid an embarrassing factional fight over AUKUS at Labor's National Conference?
Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. There's been no unilateral action by my government. My government is a strong supporter of Israel and its right to exist within secure borders. We also support a two-state solution that includes a Palestinian state. We believe that it is in the interests of both Israelis and Palestinians to have a settlement to what has been a substantial dispute in the Middle East that has had implications not just for the region but for the world. My government will continue to engage constructively on these issues, and my government has the same position as the Conservative government led by Rishi Sunak, as the European governments, as Australian governments historically have had as well. We regard a two-state solution as being essential. We think that it is in the interests of both Israelis and Palestinians for there to not be actions by either side that undermine the potential of the achievement of that two-state solution.
The call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Industry. What progress is the Albanese Labor government making in establishing the National Reconstruction Fund, and why is a new approach to support our manufacturing industry so important?
Order. The member for Barker will not interject before ministers speak. The Minister for Industry and Science has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Gilmore, who is a very strong supporter and recognises how important Australian manufacturing is in our regions in providing jobs and a stronger economic future for the country. Now, earlier this year, the Parliament legislated for the National Reconstruction Fund, a $15 billion fund that is the greatest investment in manufacturing capabilities in living memory. The NRF is an investment in Australian firms, in Australian workers, using their know-how and Australian resources to be able to make things in Australia. And today I announced the next step in delivering on our election commitment to set up the National Reconstruction Fund, the appointment of the independent board to provide high-calibre stewardship and for an investment of this size and importance, as it rightly demands. On any measure, this is a supremely qualified board, 8 well-respected, highly experienced members, a board made up of different experiences, different skills, different viewpoints from different corners of the country, but unified with the view that we can build a stronger economic future for the nation. A group of fine Australians ready to help take Australia forward, and I thank them enormously for their willingness to serve. The NRF is a massive springboard for Australian industry.
The Minister for Infrastructure and the member for Barker will cease interjecting.
It's about deepening Australia's economic complexity through value-adding to our natural advantages. And in opposition, Labor said we needed to learn from the lessons of the pandemic. These weren't just words for the moment. These provide a roadmap for our economic future, and that's what the NRF will deliver. This new approach is sorely needed after a decade of waste and mismanagement from those opposite. The Liberal and National Party's only energy towards manufacturing is to drive manufacturers out of our country, who abused taxpayer dollars through grant programs designed to deliver political benefit, not in the national benefit.
Order. The Minister will pause. I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, the question was what progress is in establishing the National Reconstruction Framework, why is the new approach to manufacturing so important, And what we've heard this minister do
All right,
is
resume your seat.
spend...
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. The minister has had some time. I'm going to bring him back to the question.
And I know the history burns like holy water, but the reality is that's what they have to learn from. They abused taxpayer dollars, and there was never an opportunity too big for those opposite to miss. And in fact, the Liberal and National parties have done everything they can in opposition to make life harder for Australian manufacturers, voting against the National Reconstruction Fund, voting against the energy price relief that manufacturers needed at a time they needed it most. But what do you expect from the party of robo-debt only focused on making
Order. The
people's
minister will
lives
return
harder?
to the question.
Today is an important step in the establishment of the National Reconstruction Fund, and we thank those Australians who are prepared to serve.
The minister's time has concluded. I give the call to the honourable member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. In signing up to the AUKUS deal, the Labor government has agreed to establish a domestic nuclear industry and dispose of nuclear waste from nuclear submarines. Is there any state or territory the Deputy Prime Minister can rule out from servicing AUKUS nuclear submarines or storing their nuclear waste?
I'll give the call. Order. I give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
We've made a couple of things clear in relation to how Australia will move down the optimal pathway of acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability. That will see Australia develop an industrial capacity to build a nuclear-powered submarine, not the nuclear reactor, but the rest of the submarine, based at Osborne in South Australia. It will see us evolve the capacity to operate a nuclear-powered submarine out of HMAS Stirling in Rockingham in Western Australia. So obviously those two states will have a particular connection with the enterprise of Australia having a nuclear-powered submarine capability. It's also fair to say, though, that this will be a huge national effort to achieve this, and we will need to rely on the industrial base and the capacities of the entire nation in order to do that. Your question, that is relevant in the context of your specific question around what happens with nuclear waste, and we've made clear that as part of being a responsible nuclear steward, Australia will take responsibility for the disposal of the nuclear waste which comes from operating nuclear-powered submarines, which is both the low-level waste associated with things such as cleaning the submarines, but ultimately the high-level waste, which will be the reactor itself. We have made clear that the high-level nuclear waste will be disposed or dealt with, finally, on a defence site, current or future. And we have said nothing more or less than that. Well, I guess in addition to that, what we've made clear is that a process by which we will determine how that all occurs is a process that we're underway right now, and we will complete within 12 months. And to be clear on that, that is not to say in 12 months' time there will be a place, but it is to say within 12 months' time we will identify what the road will be to determining where.
Give the call to the honourable member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's National Reconstruction Fund help address some of the challenges facing the Australian economy and drive future growth?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for Adelaide, an absolute champion for working people and the manufacturing industries of the great state of South Australia. Mr Speaker, this was a really important milestone. The board that the Industry Minister announced today for the National Reconstruction Fund, with the assistance of the Finance Minister, working closely with the Prime Minister and others, has put together an absolutely first-class board. And I want to thank, as he did, the 8 very distinguished and experienced Australians for agreeing to be part of the NRF. The National Reconstruction Fund is all about broadening and deepening our industrial base. It's a $15 billion vote of confidence in our workers, in our industries and in our country. Right across, Mr Speaker, manufacturing, renewables, medical, primary industries, critical minerals and in other areas as well. It's all about creating more opportunities for more people in more parts of our country. It's about laying the foundations for a stronger economy and a better future for our workers. And it's all about making our economy stronger and more resilient as well. Mr Speaker, what we learned from the wasted decade, what we learned from the pandemic and what we are still learning from the war in Ukraine is that our supply chains are not resilient enough, they're not reliable enough, they're not robust enough. And because of that, we are more vulnerable than we should be to the sorts of global economic shocks that we are going through.
The member for Barker and the member for Deakin have been continually interjecting, and we're 10 minutes into question time. We're doing things differently today. You're warned. If you interject again for the remainder of question time, you will leave question time. Treasurer, in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The weakness in our supply chains has made us more vulnerable than we should be. Now, right around the world, countries like ours are coming to this same conclusion, and it's an opportunity for Australia as much as it's a challenge for Australia. In a global economy that puts a premium on what's reliable and high quality, we have advantages, and the National Reconstruction Fund will help us leverage those advantages and make the most of this moment. Mr Speaker, busted supply chains and weakness in our industrial base is one of the key reasons for the inflation that we've seen in our economy. So investing in the supply side of the economy is a key part of our plan to address cost of living pressures. In addition to the cost of living relief that we're rolling out and getting the budget in much better nick than we inherited from those opposite, investing in the supply side is really important. Now, Mr Speaker, it's disappointing but not especially surprising to see those opposite try to block this investment in Australian industry.
Order. The Treasurer will pause. Order. Members on my right. The member for McNamara got close to being warned. The Manager of Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, a serial offender once again he couldn't help himself. He starts talking about those opposite.
Order.
It was a commendably narrowly drafted question. How will this address challenges facing the Australian economy and drive future growth? No invitation to compare and contrast.
Okay.
He should be brought back to the question.
The point of order was obviously about relevance. The Treasurer was not asked to compare and contrast, so I'm bringing him back to the question.
Mr Speaker, let me put it this way. Not everybody in this parliament has learned from the wasted decade of missed opportunities and messed up priorities. And it is a fact, Mr Speaker, it is a fact that those opposite would rather block our progress than back our workers and industries in the defining decade ahead.
Give a call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Today, the South Australian Court of Appeal is considering Tax Office whistleblower Richard Boyle's case. Mr Boyle faces trial and potential prison term because he is not protected by the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Why has the government failed to intervene in Mr Boyle's case, and when will you fix whistleblower protection laws, including by introducing a Whistleblower Protection Commissioner?
I give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Indi for her question, and I know of her very long-standing concerns about the protection of whistleblowers in our country. Her question is about both the prosecution of Mr Richard Boyle and about the importance of protection for whistleblowers. The Albanese government is delivering on its commitment to strengthen protections for whistleblowers in our country. Whistleblowers who report wrongdoing, whistleblowers who report corruption, and we are delivering through very long overdue reform to the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2013, which I had the honour of bringing to this parliament when I was last Attorney-General in 2013. On the 1st of July 2023, priority amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act came into effect, delivering on the government's commitment to implement key recommendations of the 2016 independent review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act by Mr Philip Moss AM and some other parliamentary committee reports. And it's worth noting the complete inaction by those opposite since the Moss report in 2016. It was simply allowed to gather dust. We've acted on it. These reforms represent a significant milestone towards a best practice whistleblower protection framework. They ensured that amendments and improvements to public interest disclosure and whistleblower protection were in place when the National Anti-Corruption Commission commenced its operations on the 1st of July. A second stage of reforms will include public consultation on redrafting the Public Interest Disclosure Act to address underlying complexity of the scheme and a discussion paper on the need for additional support for public sector whistleblowers, such as a Whistleblower Protection Authority or perhaps a commissioner. The first and second stages of public sector whistleblowing reform demonstrate our government's commitment to ensuring that we have an effective framework to promote integrity in the public sector and protect public sector whistleblowers who bring wrongdoing to light. You've also mentioned the prosecution of Mr Boyle, and I'd say this: integrity and the rule of law are central to Australia's criminal justice arrangements. The Attorney-General's power to discontinue proceedings is reserved for very unusual and exceptional circumstances, and it does require careful consideration before that power is exercised. Mr Boyle's proceedings remain ongoing, as the member for Indi indicated in her question. It would be inappropriate to comment further.
Before I call the member for Hunter, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Her Excellency Ms Tian Ning, the Vice-Chair of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of the People's Republic of China, and accompanying delegation. On behalf of the House, I extend a warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the National Reconstruction Fund lay stronger foundations for the future of Australian manufacturing, and what obstacles has the government had to overcome in establishing the fund?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hunter for his question, and indeed I thank him also for hosting us in Muswellbrook, which was an example there at the Centre for Innovation, right in the centre of town, of exactly what the opportunities are for new jobs and new industries in the Hunter, building on the success that the Hunter has had as a region driving our economy. It can continue to drive our economy into the future. And the National Reconstruction Fund is all about seizing the opportunities that are there. During the global pandemic, we were reminded of the problems that can arise with global supply chains and the need for us to be more self-reliant and more resilient, the need for us to make more things here, the need for us to have a manufacturing industry here, the need for us to have a future made in Australia right here is absolutely critical. Australian workers using Australian know-how and innovation and smarts and Australian resources to make more products here in Australia. Now, the independent board that's been announced today is an outstanding team, and I want to thank the Minister in this chamber, the Industry Minister and the Finance Minister, for the work that they have done to come up with such an outstanding team, chaired by Martijn Wilder, decades of experience in sustainable finance, one of the founding directors of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation that's been so successful, the chair of the board of ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and someone with an incredible background. The other people from industry, and indeed Kelly O'Dwyer with the experience that she has in this chamber as a former Assistant Treasurer as well. We on this side of the House understand the need to maximise the capacities and input of all of our Australians. The NRF will revitalise manufacturing and create secure jobs in areas like critical minerals, seizing the opportunities of renewable energy, defence capability, value-adding in resources, value-adding in agriculture, forestry and fisheries, in transport, in medical science.
Order.
All of these things being positive. Of course, they interject opposite. They oppose this because they say no to everything, Mr Speaker. They're addicted to just saying no. No to secure jobs, no to Australian manufacturing, no to new industries, and no to a future made right here in Australia.
I give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Professor Megan Davis, a key member of the Prime Minister's Referendum Working Group, has said, and I quote, "The Uluru Statement from the Heart isn't just the first one-page statement. It's actually a very lengthy document of about 18 to 20 pages." End quote. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Member for Moreton is warned. The Deputy Leader, I couldn't hear your question because of the member for Moreton's interjections. I can't be clearer. No one is to interject while questions are being asked. The Deputy Leader will restate her question.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Professor Megan Davis, a key member of the Prime Minister's Referendum Working Group, has said, and I quote, "The Uluru Statement from the Heart isn't just the first one-page statement. It's actually a very lengthy document of about 18 to 20 pages." End quote. Does the Prime Minister agree?
I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for continuing to ask questions about this conspiracy that's been out there for a long period of time.
Order.
Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr Speaker. Megan Davis said this. There's been a lot of news this week that the Uluru Statement is 26 pages long, but it's one page. That's the statement. That is what we issued to the Australian people. Indeed, this conspiracy has been around a while. ABC News fact check. I wonder who they got this off. Pauline Hanson claims list of Indigenous demands found via FOI shows dangers of a voice to Parliament. What's actually in the documents? I table the RMIT ABC fact check from 21st of April 2023 that found that it was a nonsense. I table the AAP fact check, email misleads with secret documents claim from April 21, 2023. But here we have in August, and they reheat a conspiracy theory based on absolute nonsense. Listen to this this is what one of their friends has had to say. The very documents Credlin has been highlighting has been claiming our secret have been public all along. Not new, not hidden, not a secret statement.
The Prime Minister will pause a moment.
Some bizarre.
The Prime Minister will just pause a moment. Order. The member for Petrie, I'm not sure what you're doing, but just order. We'll just cease the interjections for the time being. Order. The Treasurer, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table the document, the Henry Parkes Oration 2018, and page 8, where Professor Davis states the Uluru Statement from the Heart is a very lengthy document of 18 to 20 pages. I seek leave to table the document.
During an answer is not the time to seek. You're welcome to do it when the Prime Minister concludes his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As Chris Kenny told Sky News last night, the Referendum Council 6 years ago took these background papers, published them in a report. Now, who was in government 6 years ago? Who was in government? Who set up their Referendum Council? So this is a conspiracy. This is a conspiracy. Tony Abbott establishes a Referendum Council. It does the work leading up to 2017. They publish a report online,
The Leader of the Nationals
and
will
give
cease
it to
interjecting.
the government that was in office in 2017. It's been available online ever since 2017, but we've covered it up. I mean, for goodness sake, you couldn't make this up. As Chris Kenny said,
Order.
No one needed an FOI to get this stuff. That's how uncontroversial it is. And then Scott Morrison was Prime Minister for 4 years. Did Scott Morrison too just pretend that the Uluru Statement was 1 page long and conspire to hide the full Uluru Statement? Mr Speaker, this is absolute conspiracy and nonsense that shows that they've become a fringe political party, Mr Speaker. They're making One Nation look like a mainstream political party with this nonsense. Mark Liebler made it clear last night.
The member for
Again,
Fisher is
I
warned.
was at Uluru for the National Convention and witnessed the adoption of the statement. It was 1 page.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I seek leave to table the document and refer members to page 8, which demonstrates the 18 to 20 pages
Order.
length
Members on my right.
of the Uluru Statement
The
from
Deputy-
the Heart, and remind the Prime Minister
Order.
to refer to those pages in light of the fact
You may,
that he never
you may
answers
resume
a
your
single
seat. The Deputy Leader just needs to ask to seek to table the document, which she's done. She's entitled to do that. The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. The Leader of the House.
Oh, Mr Speaker, the document's been on the internet for 6 years. Leave's not granted.
I give the call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. How will the National Reconstruction Fund create jobs in the critical mineral sector?
Give the call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hasluck for her question. Acknowledge her. She represents the Swan Valley and did an astounding job at the wonderful and very successful showcase at WA last night in this parliament. Mr Speaker, as you'll be aware, and as many people here would be aware, thousands and millions of years of geological activity has made Australia an offer we cannot refuse. It has provided us with the minerals and the metals needed to secure the Earth's future and our own. Our critical minerals are essential for net zero technology, including electric vehicles, wind turbines, battery storage and, of course, everyday products that we use all the time, including mobile devices and laptops and other things. And as I have said before, the road to net zero runs through the Australian resources sector. To get to net zero, we will need more mining, not less. The International Energy Agency recently predicted that under a net zero emissions scenario by 2050, global demand for critical minerals will increase over the next 7 years by 350%. That is an extraordinary level of growth, and Australia has the natural resources that will enable us as a nation to respond to this international demand. We are the world's largest producer of lithium, the third largest producer of cobalt and the fourth largest producer of rare earth elements. This represents an unmissable opportunity for our nation and one that this government will not miss. And to highlight the current demand for critical minerals, I'd like to give a shout-out to the annual Diggers and Dealers Mining Forum taking place right now in the goldfields town of Kalgoorlie in my home state of WA. For over 30 years, Diggers and Dealers has traditionally been a conference of gold miners. However, for the first time in its history, Diggers and Dealers now has a larger official representation from battery minerals and metals companies than those of gold miners, as the industry seeks to support that global push for a decarbonised economy. And the push for this onshore processing is part of the drive of that increased presence at Diggers and Dealers. Through this Labor government's $1 billion Value-Adding and Resources Fund, part of the broader $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, the Albanese government will ensure a greater share of our raw materials are processed right here in Australia. We will support those businesses in these industries to secure capital, allowing them to expand their workforce, creating more jobs, more complex jobs, bringing manufacturing capability, refining capability and, all importantly, chemical processing back into our country. The critical mineral story of Australia will be one of expanded mining operations and, very importantly, that high-level chemical processing. And we will use our own resources to do it. We mined it here, we should make it here, and the Labor government will make sure that happens.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hughes.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the Minister rule out financial payments being made by the Commonwealth as part of a treaty or a Makarrata process?
Give the call to the order. The member for Hume. Just reminding him about my policy and not interjecting before ministers speak. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for her question. She asked about one element of the Uluru Statement. I am very happy to respond to that. This government is absolutely focused on the referendum at the end of this year. I am asked a question, as I said, that relates to the element of the Uluru Statement that goes to agreement making, and there is much of that going on around the country. A treaty is being progressed in Queensland with bipartisan support. A treaty is being progressed in Victoria with bipartisan support. Peter Walsh, the leader of the Victorian Nationals, said the Liberals and Nationals are committed to advancing the treaty process in Victoria. And in Tasmania, a Liberal government has established a pathway to truth-telling and treaty with bipartisan support. Jeremy Rockcliffe, the Liberal Premier of Tasmania, said, "We are committed to progressing truth-telling and treaty in true partnership with the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Our priority is constitutional recognition through a voice that will help drive better results for Indigenous people, and that is what the Australian people will vote for later this year."
Give the call to the honourable member for Macnamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What advice does the Royal Commission into Robodebt provide to governments about how they should respond to adverse decisions made by bodies hearing appeals? And how did the former government respond to legal challenges or threaten legal challenges?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for his question. The Robodebt Royal Commission found that an effective merits review tribunal to hear appeals against government administrative decisions is essential. It's essential to protect the rights of individuals and to hold the government to account for bad decisions. But the Royal Commission found that successive coalition governments effectively neutered the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, a key protection for Australians during Robodebt. Now, we know that Robodebt launched in 2015 in circumstances where initial legal advice was that Robodebt wasn't in accord with the legislation. We know that. But from 2016, the AAT made a series of decisions that questioned the legal basis for income averaging. Victims would appeal to the AAT, and the AAT made a series of decisions saying the government was wrong. But coalition governments at that point had the choice to appeal the decision because the AAT had got it wrong, or to change their policy. But they took a third strategy. They just pretended the decisions weren't happening. Subsequently, on the 8th of March 2017, Professor Terry Carney handed down the first and a series of 5 explosive decisions, giving reasons for concluding that Robodebt was unlawful. 2017. And again, what did the government do? Nothing. Just nothing. It just didn't happen. In fact, the Royal Commission has found that in no less than 424 cases where the AAT said that the use of the income averaging to assess part or the whole of the debt was wrong. 424 cases. That's a big number. That's a shocking number. They found that in 424 cases, when the government has been told you're wrong, the government neither had the intestinal fortitude to appeal the decisions, nor did it have the courage to actually say we're going to stop it. They just ignored the problems. This Royal Commission evidence is damning. What this government did, these successive coalition governments did, is you're the victim, you've gone through trauma, you finally get to the AAT, you get your hush money, settlement money, settle up. But what this coalition government never did, what none of you ever failed to do, was that you joined the dots. How many cases does it take before a government realises it's breaking the law? And do you know what the Royal Commission found out? In over 500 cases at the AAT, not once did the government's lawyers ever argue that they could rely on any law. It was a cowardly government. I just asked one thing from the Leader of the Opposition. Admit you were wrong then.
Order. I want to hear from the honourable member for New England.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Over a year ago, the Defence Honours Appeals Tribunal released the report recognising their sacrifice. That included recommendations on how to better recognise those who died of a service-related death and their families. Given this is the last sitting week before the official 50th commemoration of Australia concluding its involvement in the Vietnam War, the date being the 18th was Long Tanna Day, though the war obviously ceased before that date, will the government commit to honouring the recommendations that honour the deaths and families of our veterans?
Time has concluded. Order. I'll give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for New England, in particular for recognising that next week we will be commemorating the 50th anniversary of the end of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War on Vietnam Veterans Day, which was traditionally referred to as Long Tan Day, a very important day for Vietnam veterans across the country. And as we saw last week with the vigils that were held at the many places of memorial around the country recognising the service and sacrifice of our Vietnam veterans, veterans again will turn out here in Canberra and in many local services around Australia to commemorate the fallen, the wounded, those that have suffered both physically and mentally as a consequence of their service for our nation. And despite what may have been political controversy at that time, now as a country we come together to commemorate that service for all of those people who wore our uniform and to recognise the sacrifice that they made and to recognise the sacrifice of their families as well in supporting them, not only when they went away, but when they came back. The report that the member has referred to from the Defence Honours and Award Tribunal is a very lengthy and detailed report. It gives rise to a number of recommendations, but it gives rise to a number of questions as well. And so it is going to take some time to work through how that report is to be dealt with by government, to be properly understood the consequences that may come from some of those recommendations, properly put and understood in terms of the breadth of application that they may take. But regardless of how we work through that process, as there are a number of reports coming from that tribunal already that the government has already taken action on since we came into government in just over the first 12 months, we will consider that report as well. But the critical thing that the report raises, which regardless of how those recommendations may be dealt with in the fullness of time by this government, is the core point which goes back to what the member was raising and which I think all members of this House and all members of this parliament agree, that when people sign up to join our Defence Force, they do that with a common purpose to defend our nation, to serve our nation. Some of those people may not be able to come back to their families, whether that's in time of war or in time of peace. Some people may come back to their families being wounded, whether that's physical or mental. And certainly, as we have seen with the Royal Commission that is ongoing right now, there are some that end up taking their own lives as a consequence of their service. And that is something that we are working to, and I'm sure all members of this parliament are committed to ensuring that we address that national tragedy as well.
The call to the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government investing in cleaner and cheaper energy, and why is this important? How does this contrast to the other energy policies?
Call to the Minister. Give the call to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Higgins for her question and her climate leadership in this building, which should be acknowledged. And, Mr Speaker, the Albanese government's investing in cheaper and cleaner energy through the Climate Change Act, through the Capacity Investment Mechanism, which those opposite promised and could never deliver, through rewiring the nation, and importantly, investing in the renewable energy supply chain through the National Reconstruction Fund. And I want to congratulate the Industry Minister on his announcement today of a very strong board for the National Reconstruction Fund, led by Martine Walder, an expert in renewable energy, a board which will play a very important role in Australia's renewable energy transformation. I'm pleased to report to the member for Higgins and to the House that the latest figures show AEMO connection approvals for last financial year up substantially for renewable energy, 6 gigawatts, up 2 full gigawatts in 12 months, and 7 gigawatts in total. So the vast majority of the new energy being renewable energy, and a big increase in AEMO connection approvals over the last financial year. Mr Speaker, I'm asked by the honourable member about other policies. And there is a bit to talk about here too, Mr Speaker, in relation to the honourable member's question. We saw on the front page of the Australian today a big announcement from the opposition coalition set to go nuclear on energy, Mr Speaker. And we read that nuclear energy is going to be a centrepiece, Mr Speaker, of the coalition's 2025 energy policy. Now, we look forward to this centrepiece.
New England will
we look
cease
forward
interjecting.
to the costings and to the locations of the nuclear power stations when the honourable Shadow Minister releases them. But I've got to say I've been a bit confused, Mr Speaker, about why a party claiming to be economically rational would propose the most expensive form of energy as a way to reduce prices, Mr Speaker.
Order.
They say they want to reduce prices, and there's been another update. I've got to tell the House, I was listening to one of my favourite podcasts on the weekend, Sundays with Stoker, Mr Speaker. former minister, she runs it. You can't think of a Sunday without Sunday with Stoker. The honourable member for Fairfax was on, and he said, if you look at Canada, even today they have even between 50 and 60% of their grid is nuclear. They pay half the energy prices of Australia. And I had to pause and rewind and listen again, because I thought, actually, I know that 50 to 60% of Canada's power comes from renewable hydro energy, Mr Speaker. Hydro energy. Less than 15 comes from nuclear. As Electricity Canada said, Canada's access to renewable natural resources allows for some of the lowest residential electricity prices in the world. So, Mr Speaker, I table the honourable member for Fairfax's transcript, and I table the report from Electricity Canada showing their renewable prices lead for some of the cheapest prices in the world.
The member for Hume will cease interjecting. The member for Fairfax will not use props during question time. I give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
To the Minister for Social Services. 42 Australian women have been killed this year, mostly by men. 3 have been killed in the past 5 days. Most are alleged to have been killed by a current or former partner. In Goldstein, 50% of the police caseload is family and domestic violence. It's been 10 months since the release of the National Plan. When will we see the action plans, and how is the Commonwealth going to work with the states and territories to meet measurable targets to urgently address this national crisis?
I give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Goldstein for that question and appreciate the way that her commitment and also the way she's worked to raise the voices of women and children fleeing domestic violence. Of course, the safety of women and children experiencing domestic and family violence is a national priority for our government. Family and domestic and sexual violence destroys lives. And of course, one life lost is one life too many, and it must end. And that is why the Albanese government has made ending family and domestic violence a key priority since coming to government. And of course, we delivered the national plan with states and territories to end violence against women and children in one generation. But we've also been working very hard in collaboration with states and territories in the development of our action plans. At a meeting of women and women's safety ministers just recently, all state and territory and Commonwealth ministers renewed our commitment to ending violence against women and children. At this meeting, all ministers affirmed the importance of the final endorsement of the action plans which support our national plan. The action plans will detail the actions our government will take at a Commonwealth level, as well as the shared ambition that each state and territory will also take to help achieve our goal. There will be two action plans, the first National Action Plan and a dedicated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Action Plan. And these will be accompanied by an outcomes framework. This will be an important document for accountability for all levels of government to be measured against. Of course, since coming to government, we have made family and domestic violence a key priority. In our first two budgets, we have made a record of investment of $2.3 billion at a Commonwealth level to ensure that supports and services are available. We have been fixing up the escaping domestic violence payment because it was taking too long for victim survivors to access this support. We've of course secured ongoing funding for states and territories to deliver frontline services. This was funding that was not in the forward estimates and not provisioned by the former government. We are delivering our commitment for new frontline workers, and of course we've increased the support for temporary visa holders experiencing domestic and family violence from 3,000 to 5,000, a call from many in the sector. We've legislated 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave for all employees, including casuals. We're investing in educational resources about consent support and support for young people. We will, and this is just a small number of the actions we've taken, we will continue to take this area incredibly serious as a national priority and work with all of those who wish to work with us.
Before I call the member for Reid, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today also a delegation from the International Livestock Research Institute based in Nairobi, Kenya, led by Professor Apollina de Jong and including Professor Gabrielle Pursley AM, and also, as guests of the member for Kennedy, board members from National Seniors Australia. Welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What impact have government policies had in improving outcomes in employment and workplace relations? How does this compare with some of the commentary?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid both for the question and for her advocacy to see more people in work and to see them better paid. It's possible now to have a look at what the average figures were over that lost decade that the Treasurer referred to and compare with what we're getting now. If you start with unemployment figures, the average unemployment figure over that lost decade of the time those opposite were in office was 5.6%. If we had their average unemployment figure today, an additional 300,000 people would be out of work. Instead, this government has had the best first year of new jobs for any Australian government. And that is 500,000 people in work. 500,000 new jobs.
The member for
and the majority of them, overwhelming. How many of them are full-time? 85% of those jobs full-time, and the majority of those full-time jobs held by women. But not only are there more people in work, not only are there more people in full-time work, people in those jobs are now being better paid than they were under those opposite. Those opposite.
The member for
Under
Mallee.
their time in office, wages grew at an average of 2.1%. 2.1% was the average growth in wages.
Order.
If you applied that average wage growth to what workers have in fact received, you would see now that people on the minimum wage, had we kept their settings, where low wage growth was a deliberate design feature of their measures, and they knew our policy changes would produce increased wages. They even said that was why they opposed them. The Leader of the Opposition said that's why he opposed them. The Shadow Treasurer said that's why he opposed them. But on national minimum wage workers would be $45 a week worse off right now if we kept those settings in place. Award wages, a retail worker would be $44 a week worse off if we kept those settings in place. A hospitality worker would be nearly $2,500 a year worse off. And the strongest figures of the difference in the change of government in wages is for aged care workers. An aged care direct employee level 4 every week would be $195 worse off if we had kept their settings in place.
There was far too much noise on my left. The member for Casey is now warned, and the member for Hume is warned. And the member for Gippsland will stop. I can hear every word you're saying, trust me. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Did the Minister receive advice from her department recommending that she approve additional routes applied for by Qatar Airways?
I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development. The member for Page will leave the chamber under 94A. I can't be clearer. Before I call a minister is not the time to do. Keep going. Everyone's clear on that? Good. The Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the former member for infrastructure for the question. He would well know that these are bilateral agreements that are made between governments. And as with all bilateral agreements that are made between governments, they are international agreements, and that we only sign up to agreements that benefit our national interest in all of its broad complexity. And that includes ensuring that we have an aviation sector through the recovery that employs Australian workers. In determining what our national interest is, we have to consider a broad range of factors, and not one factor led to this particular decision. The government has determined that agreeing to the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority request for additional services is not in our national interest, and we will always consider the need to ensure that there are long-term, well-paid, secure jobs by Australians in the aviation sector when we are making this decision. And I am pretty sure that the minister, when he was in that position, had exactly the same view when faced with the same question.
Give a call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What new information has been brought to the attention of government in relation to deficient procurements identified by the Watt Review and by other reviews of government services procurement?
Give the call to the Minister for the Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Thank you. Members will recall that on November the 24th last year, I updated the House on disturbing reports in the Age Sydney Morning Herald about how the former member for Fadden, Stuart Robert, used his status as a federal MP to assist undeclared Canberra lobbying firm Synergy 360 sign up corporate clients. The allegation was essentially that Synergy's 360 business model is that Mr Robert was their sort of ace in the hole and could open doors for them. following these revelations, 2 agency heads initiated the Watt review of procurement practices led by eminent former public servant Dr Watt. One procurement reviewed as part of the Watt review was a massive multi-million-dollar contract awarded to software giant Infosys. That was to upgrade the welfare payment software. It was called the Entitlement Calculation Engine. Also, what has emerged is that Infosys, who got this big contract, had a commercial relationship with Synergy 360. Now, the ECE procurement was meant to transform the way welfare services were delivered in this country, and Infosys and its subsidiaries have been paid $126 million to do this. But after multiple delays and problems, Infosys never delivered what they promised. So Services Australia has made a decision to stop throwing good money after bad, and it's written off the former Liberal government's project at a total cost of $191 million to the taxpayer. But today, in the SMH and Age, there are reports that Stuart Robert frequently met with Infosys, beginning in September 2018 when he was Assistant Treasurer, and then as a recycled Cabinet Minister after 2019. And furthermore, in documents tendered to Mr Hill's committee, the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audit, by Infosys, it's revealed that on no less than 11 occasions, Mr Robert met with Infosys with no probity advisor or APS representative in attendance. And at least 6 of these meetings, miraculously, Synergy 360 was in attendance. Now, we know from Infosys' testimony at the public hearing that Infosys, who got $126 million from the former coalition government, paid Synergy 360 $16 million. Of course, the other thing that we've learned here is that somewhat decently of Synergy 360, in 2017 they gave Mr Roberts' chief fundraiser in Queensland, Mr Margerrison, whereabouts unknown, they gave him a free 20% share of the lobbying company. So now this is where we're at. Mr Roberts left the building, Mr Margerrison's left the country. There's been $191 million splashed up against the proverbial wall of taxpayers' money. Now the question is for the opposition and the Leader of the Opposition, what steps have you taken to satisfy yourself as to the probity of Mr Roberts' conduct? Have you asked the Queensland LNP where Mr Margerrison is, and is he still an LNP member? And will you repudiate Mr Roberts' conduct?
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In National Homelessness Week, the stark truth is that housing has become a nightmare for many Australians, particularly young people. I welcome the government's commitment to work with the states to boost housing supply by improving zoning and planning laws and processes. But despite the states receiving an extra $2 billion in federal funding, we have no guarantees they will deliver on much-needed reforms. What guarantees of reform is the Prime Minister aiming to get from the states next week? And will the Prime Minister make future funding contingent on them actually delivering more housing?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Wentworth for her question. I thank her for her concern about these issues, and I've met with the member for Wentworth one-on-one about some of the ideas that she has to address what are major issues when it comes to housing supply in this country that are having a particularly adverse effect on young Australians. The member for Wentworth understands that this is about supply, and that is why, in the issues that she has raised with me, we've been broadly in agreement about the direction in which she wants Australia to go. We have a meeting of the National Cabinet next Wednesday, and I've spoken with state premiers and chief ministers about how we move forward when it comes to supply. With the $2 billion that we brought forward in the Social Housing Accelerator, when we met in June, we insisted that that has to be additional supply. So it can be new social housing completely, or it can be indeed some social housing that's been left derelict and isn't currently occupied, so it adds to supply as well. We know from experience when the member for Sydney was the housing minister of this country that the big difference that was made in that time was actually making sure that housing
the Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting.
At that time unoccupied, got renovated, got made fit for purpose in a dynamic way. And certainly our housing policy has that as agreed. The other thing, though, that we'll be discussing next week is how we achieve the National Housing Accord. And what we want to do is to put in place
the Prime Minister
measures.
will pause. The Minister for Environment is warned, will cease interjecting, but the member for Barker will leave the chamber under 94A. If you receive a warning and you interject after the warning, you'll leave the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The National Housing Accord is really critical, and we want to make sure that all states and territories have plans to get there. Now, that's about land release, it's about zoning, it's about density, particularly around appropriate public transport routes, and it is about making sure that we increase supply, because that is what will make the big difference. And I must say that First Ministers have been very positive and constructive about this, and I'm confident that next week we will have some really good results and outcomes that will lead to what the member for Wentworth wants to see, which is real change, making a real difference out there. The other thing that First Ministers all emphasised to me is the need to pass the Housing Australia Future Fund, because that's an important component. It's just one, but it's an important component when it comes to increasing housing supply.
Give a call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering for regional Australia, and why was a different approach needed?
I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Bendigo for her question. As someone who holds the sister seat of two great cities in our great state of Victoria, I know how passionate she is about the regions. I always say Ballarat's just a little bit better than Bendigo, but we love Bendigo as well and truly. Now, of course, the Albanese government is getting on with the job of delivering for our regions. We look forward to the opportunity to talk more about this at the News Corp Bush summits that are happening across the country. I know the Prime Minister will be at the one in Tamworth. I know that the other Minister King will be in Perth. We've got other ministers going to those Bush summits, and it's good to see. I know that other members will be engaging with that. They're great opportunities across from Wodonga, Hobart, Perth, Rockhampton and Port Lincoln, I think. But we've got a really good story to tell at all of those. A new approach to regional development is being forged by this government. And despite what those opposite keep continually saying, the reality is those opposite could not have cared less about regional Australia and about developing a fair and equitable approach to all of our regions, not just to some of our regions. Many of those I meet in regional Australia tell me that they were fed up with the mess that was left by the previous government when it came to funding, particularly of grants programs. From those things that we've had to clean up, like the community development grants, a grants program where no community organisations could actually apply, while those opposite kept topping it up as a slush fund for their own preferred commitments. The Building Better Regions Fund, which the Audit Office found favoured National Party electorates, and decisions were made on rules that applicants didn't know about. Our approach is different. We're investing all the way across. Every single one of the ministers on this front bench has responsibility for regional Australia, whether it comes to regional health, where we've got the Minister for Health investing in our regions, particularly through the bulk billing incentive, tripling that and making sure that we get bulk billing moving again in our regions, making medicines cheaper and investing in rural pharmacies. Through the education portfolio, where we're establishing new university study hubs in our regions, gaps in access to campuses and universities across our regions. Those regional study hubs are, of course, in addition to those that are already there. through our Powering the Regions Fund, investing in the transformation of our regional economies, making sure that we're ready and we're available to actually take advantage of that new economy. From telecommunications, investing in new broadband, making sure we're investing in mobile telecommunications. I was in the member for Hunter's electorate and we saw the cable being rolled out in the streets there. From the regions far and wide, we're investing in all of the regions. We're making sure that there's an equitable approach, unlike what those...
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. Prominent Yes advocate Marcus Stewart has said of treaty negotiations, quote, they could take 10 to 20 years to be negotiated. Can the Minister inform the House as to how long the government expects treaty negotiations to carry on for?
There are some problems with that question. The Minister's not responsible for every single statement for every single person, but the end part of the question is within order. Yeah. The end part of the question is, obviously, the Minister can answer that how she sees fit. The Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Capricornia for her question. The question went to issues to do with an element of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And the position of the Australian Government is that we support the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This is an idea that came from Indigenous Australians themselves, not the government. It is a generous offer to all Australians to walk together to a better future. And this year we have the chance to vote for constitutional recognition through a voice. It is something that I support. It is something the member for Barara supports, the member for Bass, the member for Clare, the member for Curtin, the member for Wentworth, and a number of Liberal premiers across the country, including the Liberal Premier from Tasmania, Jeremy Rockcliffe. It is important to understand. It is important to understand that recognition through a voice is about a better future.
Give the call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. How will the voice ensure better and fairer education for future generations?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the top-notch member for Tangney for his question. Uncle Harry Ali is 80 years old.
Order.
He was born in Charters Towers, and in 1966 he joined the Royal Australian Air Force, the year before the referendum. Before that referendum he wasn't counted, but he was there for Australia when it counted. He served in Malaysia, his brother served in Vietnam. He served his country for more than 23 years. A couple of months ago, Harry had a triple bypass. I saw him on the streets of Bankstown in my neck of the woods the other day handing out for the Yes campaign. I asked him why he was there. In his typical humble way, he said to me, for the next generation. 56% of Australian kids today are assessed as ready to start school, but only 34% of Indigenous kids are. 96% of 10-year-olds today are assessed as meeting the minimum literacy and numeracy standards, but only 77% of Indigenous students do. 82% of young Australians finish high school today, but only 57% of Indigenous Australians do. And almost 1 in 2 young Australian adults has a university degree today, but only 7% of young Indigenous Australians do. These are the kids who are missing out. This is the next generation that Harry's talking about. And it's not just them missing out. Education doesn't just change the life of one individual. It changes families, it changes whole communities. It ricochets from one generation to the next. Because if your parents finish school, you're more likely to finish school. You're more likely to go to TAFE or to university and earn more money and pay more tax. and your children are more likely to live better lives. That's the power of education, but it hasn't reached into every corner of this country or every home. In all the time that we have all been here, this gap hasn't closed. It's barely budged. In some cases, it's got worse, despite everything that Labor governments and coalition governments have done or have tried to do. And this should tell us that if we want things to change, then we have to do more than just change what we do. We have to change the way we do things. That's what The Voice is about. We've got nothing to fear from listening and a lot to gain. Better results, a better use of taxpayers' money, more Indigenous kids going to preschool, to primary school, to finishing high school, more young Indigenous blokes going to university than to jail. That's what this is about. It's about, as my old mate Harry says, the next generation. The next generation. And if that's not a reason to vote yes, if they are not a reason to vote yes, then I don't know what is.
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. After no questions on the economy or cost of living from those opposite, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.